It's definitely a sticky wicket for the government there. I mean, a real can of worms. So I don't think they're going to disclose voluntarily. They're going to have to be pushed into it. And I think they will disclose because they have no other choice. They're going to lose control of this whole situation. Now, as far as the Orson Welles broadcast, yeah, that was amazing that people reacted that way. But in a way, you can't blame them. It was well written. It was designed really to scare people.
They did a good job.
Invasion, right? So I'm not sure that that's what we're going to see, where people are grabbing their guns and running for the hills. I think disclosure could be handled in a much smoother fashion, and that people would handle it just fine, because at this point, it's already believed. It's an open conspiracy. Most people, according to polls, believe our government is hiding information about UFOs, and I'm absolutely convinced that they have craft, that they have the beings, and not just one or two, but secreted throughout Air Force bases and military installations across the United States and our planet. A lot of them. I wrote UFOs over California. I found several crash retrieval cases. UFOs over Nevada, UFOs over New Mexico, UFOs over Colorado, New York, Arizona. Every single one of them had UFO crash cases. So it's not just Roswell or Aztec, New Mexico, or Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. There are hundreds of these things. Our government is neck deep in this stuff, and for them to take our tax dollars and spend our money to ridicule this subject and make witnesses look like fools and keep this stuff secret is an absolute constitutional crisis. They don't have the right to do this. I'm sure their argument is national security, but every single study officially on UFOs that has been done has found that they're not a national security threat, when they so obviously are. I mean, they are abducting people, they're hovering over our nuclear power stations, they're shutting off missiles, they're chasing cars down the road. Yes, from a military standpoint, these things are absolutely a national security threat. So our government has bungled this to an enormous degree. They've painted themselves into a corner, and it's going to be really difficult when this all goes down. And people are going to be angry, is, I think, how they're going to mostly react. And there's going to be some heads rolling. I don't think people are going to be, as much scared of ETs. I think they're going to be really angry at our government and the other governments and the people who've orchestrated this cover-up.
Well, I'm scared that something like that would cause martial law, because I do think a lot of people are going to really, at that point now, not trust the government, not just because of the ETs, everything else that we've been told by the government. Because let's face it, our president said all the news is fake, and then you look at it, what you hear out of Washington, D.C., you look at it, well, that's fake. Who do you believe? But the biggest mistake was ever made in Roswell, when that crashed, when they first announced there was a UFO, and then the next morning they changed it to a weather balloon. I think that was the most craziest thing, and that's where they got into a lie, and it just been going on ever since.
Yeah, I totally agree. They painted themselves into a corner, from that moment. Gosh, if they had just let it ride, it would have been a very, very different world. We could have devoted all our, mainstream science and all our energy to, dealing with this. Not, like we're dealing with it, but it's very covert. And even high levels of government aren't aware of this. I think at the very high levels, the generals, within the Navy, the admirals, these people are definitely aware of the UFO situation. I believe a number of senators and representatives are as well, but a lot aren't. I think a lot of people within government have no idea about this phenomena, and it's ongoing. So it's a real problem. And Roswell, boy, they threatened people. People died as a result of all that went down. The Roswell story is not over yet. I'm not going to give up until I see the Roswell craft in a museum. I deserve that. We all do. It's real. I think the evidence shows that. There's some 300 witnesses at least to just the Roswell case. I mean, we've tracked that thing from the people who saw it go down people in the radar office, people who guarded the wreckage, the people who transported the wreckage, the people who studied the wreckage. So many interviews have been done with that particular case. I just cannot see it ever going away.
Well, what I can't see is where it crashed. It took out a lot of trees in its path before it rested against those rocks. So I can't see a weather balloon coming down and taking out, huge trees for that big an area. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, the Air Force's explanation of mogul balloon with dummies on it is laughable, and it's been, pretty easily debunked by a lot of researchers. But still, we're not getting the information on it. Our government, Representative Stephen Schiff of New Mexico tried to get information on Roswell and made no headway. And it was shortly after that he died of some aggressive form of cancer. Now, I'm not saying, any conspiracy to that, but, geez, I wonder sometimes because there are a number of people who've tried to disclose and paid for it with their lives.
Well, that's what...
I always wonder what...
Oh, go ahead, sir.
Like James Forrestal might be a good example, who, allegedly committed suicide by jumping off from out of his hotel room. But a lot of researchers have said, no. And, for that matter, Kennedy was supposedly on the verge of disclosure when he was assassinated.
That's the scary part. One thing my friend Art Bell, which I really miss him a lot, our private, conversations we'd have off and on. One thing he really intrigued him is like all these scientists that were involved in certain government UFO programs or supposedly or whatever, just died all in a short period of time of weird things like car accidents, heart attacks, aggressive cancer, but they all died, and it was so many of them in a very short span of time, and that's what the scary part is.
Yeah, it is scary. There are abductees who don't have a problem with the aliens. They're afraid of the government because every time they get abducted by ETs, the government comes swooping in afterwards and just there's this horrendous questioning session that follows, which is worse than the actual ET encounter. So,
what's really scary, back years and years ago, I used to have a friend, I don't know if you remember Republic Airlines, but he was the vice president for Republic Airlines, and I got to know him because of the type of business I had. We ended up being really good friends for a long period of time before the airlines went belly up and he moved out. But, a lot of things he told me, like when he was in the Air Force during the Vietnam War, going over and dropping the eggs over in Vietnam and then returning back, to the base, he saw a UFO off his wing. And he learned a real fast and a real smart thing. If you see a UFO and you're a pilot, you don't report it. Military-wise or non-military-wise, otherwise, that's the end of your career. And he said that when he got back and they landed, every person on that B-52 was taken in separate rooms. And it wasn't military guys, it was guys dressed in suits interrogating them. And all of them had to sign disclosures and all the stuff that they ever reported. Again, all these bad things can happen to them.
Wow. Yeah, that's insane. When I hear stories like this, it really angers me because here we have this cover-up again, which is ridiculous. I know of another pilot case very similar to that, where a guy this was in, I believe, Nevada, where he had objects surrounding his plane. It came in for landing finally, and same thing. Government, not Air Force officials, some undisclosed government agency. They questioned him, and for a long time, and warned him that he might have health problems, asked him if he had had any out-of-body experiences following his sighting, which was an odd question, and it really intrigued the pilot because, yes, he had. He had just had a major out-of-body experience following this UFO encounter. So they definitely know a lot about it, including the psychic aspects.
Oh, yeah. What's bad about pilots, if they report it, what the first thing that will happen to them, they lose their, well, they're not going to be having a license to fly anymore. They are fired from their job. I mean, there was one pilot, and I can't remember the airlines. He fought it with the attorney, and he prevailed. But there's been a lot of pilots who were forced to resign or were forced into retirement early because they reported UFOs. And that's the scary part, because you know what? If you see one, if you do report it, I mean, either you're going to be labeled as a nutcase or whatever, because that's what they'll do to you. If you actually seen one, if you actually go up and tell the authorities right now, you call them up and say, I was abducted, I was taken up on a UFO. Well, you know what? They're going to probably investigate your past life as much as they can. They're going to probably talk to you, and then, they're going to try everything they can to discredit you.
Yeah, I actually wrote about this in one of my books, Not From Here, about, the chapter is called See a UFO, Lose Your Job, because it's not just pilots. It's widespread across a lot of professional fields, and particularly police officers suffer very badly from this, which is so ironic because police officers, it's their job to go out there and look for anything unusual, dangerous, out of the ordinary, any invaders, this sort of thing. And they see something that's like the ultimate, sort of like, wow, what is this? And they report it, and they're overlooked for promotions. They're ridiculed. I mean, look what happened to Alan Godfrey, a British police officer who saw a UFO, and even though there was other people, calling the police station saying they had seen it, all his fellow officers ridiculed him mercilessly. More sightings came in. The ridicule slowed down, but at this point, his sighting had become so famous, his superiors were getting angry and asked him to resign. He refused, so they took his police car and gave him a bicycle. And, that's humiliating, and, definitely.
That would be, here's a bike, and now. You're hoping then he'd probably resign. But, another thing, Peter Davenport has told us on our shows that he's been getting sightings lately of UFOs. But more than UFOs also, now it's kind of changed a little bit, that actually people reporting aliens. They're seeing aliens in weird places, like in the forest, out in secluded areas. I had, back 4 months ago, a police sergeant out of one of the largest cities out of Oregon was going to come on my show because him and his wife were up by Tillamook, Oregon, out in the woods. They were going to go camping somewhere around there. And they saw what he described was aliens. And then when they did a double back look on them, they were gone. And he was going to come on and talk about it, to tell us what they were dressed like and all that stuff. And the next thing I know, he said, well, if I do, I'm going to lose my job, and he didn't want to come on. Now, I did verify. I called up that department. Yes, he was a sergeant there. He's been there for 20 years. I maybe can see his point why he didn't want to come on. He probably thought it over, or somebody told him, don't do it.
Wow. Yeah, that's a shame. I wonder how many people are keeping quiet with this stuff. Well, I know it's a lot. Usually particularly if they have an extensive experience, say an onboard experience or face-to-face encounter, first thing out of people's mouths usually is, I don't do drugs, or I'm well-educated. I've got no history of mental illness in my family. I don't drink, and this sort of thing. I've got a good job. There's some caveat where people are, the ridicule factor is a real problem, and it shouldn't be. It was basically foisted upon us by our own government through the Condon Committee and a very active campaign to make this subject look ridiculous. Thankfully, I think that's largely overcome, but obviously not completely. Until this subject goes mainstream, is taught in schools, and is an accepted fact, we're going to deal with this ridicule factor.
Oh, yeah. And then, what's bad, even going, and I'm not going to go really into it at all, but Bob Azar, it seemed like after what he talked about, it seemed like it didn't take long, and all of a sudden, his whole history of his jobs or what he ever did was like removed as much as possible. for you couldn't find information about it. And that tells me that the government out there is